Since when do we serve animals with that dirty black skin at this counter?
Hollis Drake roared it across the room, his face twisted with disgust, and he hurled a full cup of scalding hot coffee straight across the old man's chest. The soft flannel shirt went dark and steaming in an instant. The ceramic mug exploded against the marble floor, and before the man could even flinch, Drake drew back one of his $5,000 shoes and kicked the taped-up cornet case clean out of his hand, sending it skidding hard across the floor in front of 300 of the richest people in New Orleans.
Get your black ass out of my sight!
Drake hissed. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and he spat right onto the man's scuffed work boots, in front of every guest in the room.
Look at you! You smell like the back of a bus, boy. People like you don't get to breathe the same air in a platinum-level firm like this. You don't, and you never will. You are nothing but a disgusting little rat!
Laughter cracked across the wealthy crowd, and then it died in their throats, because 300 phones were already up, screens glowing in the dark like a field of cold little stars, and one of them, held high by a music journalist near the front, was already live. 40,000 people were watching the most powerful man in the Southern music business pour scalding coffee on a defenseless stranger and call him an animal. In real time. And the number on her screen was climbing every single second. The 51-year-old black man did not move. He did not scream. He did not swing. He did not say one word. He just lifted his eyes to Hollis Drake's face and held them there. Steady, with a calm so deep and so cold that the entire bright, gilded room seemed to drop 10 degrees all at once. Hollis Drake thought he had just put a worthless street beggar in his place, in front of all his important guests, and that the worst thing the man could do was cry. He had no idea. None at all. With that one cup of coffee, with that one kick, with that one word, Hollis Drake had just signed the death warrant on his entire music empire, and the whole thing was already recording. Before we get to the moment that brought a billionaire down to his knees on live television, the moment a single piano did what an army of lawyers never could. Do me one small favor. If you love watching arrogant, cruel, untouchable people finally get every last thing they have coming to them, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story pays off in full, with interest. Now, let me take you back. Just a few hours. Same city. A completely different world. New Orleans, Louisiana. Late September. The kind of evening where the heat finally lets go of the city and everybody drifts out onto their porches to breathe. If you have ever stood on Bourbon Street on a Friday night, you know the sound. Brass pouring out of every doorway. 3 bands fighting in the air at once. A streetcar rattling somewhere in the dark. Ice clinking in plastic cups. The smell of fried shrimp and spilled drinks hanging over everything like cheap perfume. That is New Orleans. If your pockets are full, now walk with me. Past the last bar that still has a live band. Across Rampart Street. Under the rusted iron ribs of the Claiborne overpass. The highway they bulldozed straight through the heart of Trem 60 years ago. The one that flattened the oak trees, and the black-owned shops, and the Sunday parades, and never once said sorry. Keep walking. The neon thins out. The tourist money dries up like a puddle in August. And the music changes. No speakers now. No stage lights. Just a man. A horn. And a square of cardboard leaning against the boarded-up front of what used to be a barber shop. The sign was painted by hand. Careful block letters. It said, "Songs. $1 or a smile." That man was Solomon Gaines. Everybody on the block just called him Soul. His cornet was an old con. Decades old. And it had been through a war and back. The brass was worn down to bare metal where his hands had gripped it for 40 years. One valve stuck if you forgot to oil it. The third slide was held on with a twist of copper wire. It looked like something you would pull out of the bottom of a flood. But when Soul Gaines lifted that horn to his lips, none of it mattered. Not the wire. Not the stuck valve. Not the tape on the case. His tone came out warm and round and aching. The kind of sound that made strangers slow down on the sidewalk and not know why. He played whatever the street asked for. Spirituals in the early evening when the church ladies walked home. Blues when the working men got off shift. A little something he made up on the spot that nobody would ever hear again. 5 hours a day. 6 on a good night. On a good night? Forte. Maybe $50. On a bad night? Just enough for a loaf of bread and bus fare for his daughter. Her name was Naima Gaines. 16 years old. A junior at the local high school. And the kind of student who read college brochures the way other kids read comic books. Hungry. Underlined. Dog-eared. She wanted to be an architect. She wanted to build things that would still be standing long after she was gone. She had circled 3 schools in a worn paperback she checked out from the library so many times, the lady at the desk stopped scanning it and just waved her through. There was a summer program, a real pre-college architecture studio at a university across town, 5 weeks long. The kind of thing that puts your name on a path that actually leads somewhere. The kind of thing that gets a girl from Trem into rooms that do not usually open for girls from Trem. The deposit was $1,600. The deadline was 5 weeks away. Soul had saved $280. It lived in a coffee can under the kitchen sink, behind the dish soap, wrapped in a rubber band. Every single night, Naima asked him the same thing. How did you do today, Daddy? And every single night, Soul gave her the same answer. We are getting there. Baby. We are getting close. He was not getting close. He knew it. He knew it the way you know a thing in the pit of your stomach at 3 a.m. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Murray Street. The machines rumbled through the floor until past midnight. A low industrial heartbeat you only noticed when it stopped. The hot water worked when it felt like working. He slept on the couch so Naima could have the bedroom and a door she could close. He owned 3 flannel shirts, and he had folded them so many times the creases had creases. But here is the part nobody on Murray Street knew. Here is the part nobody under the Claiborne overpass knew. The part the tourists who flipped $1 into his case never thought to wonder about. Solomon Gaines was not a horn player. Not really. The cornet was his second language. The cornet was the thing he picked up to keep his daughter fed. His first language. The one that lived down in his blood. The one that was put there before he could even walk. Was the piano. He was born in Memphis and raised on the move. Memphis. Baton Rouge. New Orleans. Wherever his mother could find a church that needed somebody at the keys. Her name was Odessa Gaines. And she played piano and organ in storefront sanctuaries with peeling paint and folding chairs. The kind of playing that made grown women shout and old men weep into their handkerchiefs. Soul sat on her lap at rehearsal before he could talk. By the time he was 4, his hands had found the keys on their own. The way water finds the low ground. Bitten. He could play anything he heard one time through. A hymn. A Stevie Wonder song off the radio. A Chopin piece the white lady down the street practiced with her window open. He did not learn to read music until much later. He did not need to. The music went in through his ears and came back out through his hands. And nobody ever taught him the road between the two. It was just there. By 14, Solomon Gaines was, with no exaggeration and no real competition, the finest young pianist in the city of New Orleans. Self-taught, ear-trained, His high school band director, a man with a master's degree and 40 years of listening to children play, sat in the back of the auditorium during Soul's sophomore recital. And when it was over, he did not clap, and he did not move for a long minute. Then he walked up to the boy and said 5 words. I have nothing to teach you. And here is where the story turns. Here is where you need to lean in close. Because this is the engine of everything that comes next. And Hollis Drake is about to walk straight into it. At 17, Solomon Gaines won a full scholarship to a respected conservatory of music, piano performance. 4 years. Every dollar covered. The letter came on heavy paper, and his mother framed it and hung it in the hallway. But that same restless, glorious year, when he was 17 and the whole city felt like it belonged to him, Soul was writing songs. Not exercises, real songs, with bones and blood, that he scratched out in pencil in a stack of black composition notebooks his mother gave him for his birthday. One of those songs he wrote at the kitchen table in a single night, thinking about his mother's hands on the keys and the hard road she had traveled to keep the two of them fed. He called it Carry Me Over. Remember that title. Every person in this story is going to remember it. Eventually, that same summer, a hungry young hustler came through New Orleans looking for talent he could turn into money. He was 24 years old, dressed sharp on credit, with a quick smile and a quicker handshake. And he had a nose for exactly 2 things: songs that could sell and people who could not fight back. His name was Hollis Drake. Drake heard about a black kid in the 7th Ward who could play anything and write better than men twice his age. He found Soul. He bought him a fried catfish dinner and told him he was going to be a star. He brought a handsome, marketable young singer into a cheap studio on Magazine Street and had Soul teach him the songs, play the parts, shape every chord. 3 days of work. And the centerpiece of those sessions, the one Drake played back again and again with that hungry smile, was Carry Me Over. Soul was 17 years old. He did not have a lawyer. He did not have a father in the room. He had a handshake and a promise, and a man who looked him in the eye and said, "Trust me, son, I am going to take care of you." He did not take care of him. Carry Me Over came out the next year, under another man's name. It crossed over from gospel radio to soul to the pop charts. It sold, and it sold, and it sold. It became a wedding song, a funeral song, a song they still play on Sunday mornings in cities Soul Gaines has never even seen. It was the foundation stone of an empire. Every gold record on Hollis Drake's wall, every platinum plaque, every floor of that glass tower on Poydras Street with his name carved over the door. All of it was built on top of a song a 17-year-old black boy wrote at his kitchen table in one night, thinking about his mother's hands. Solomon Gaines never saw 1 penny of it. His name never appeared on the label. And when the boy he used to be started asking questions, when he wrote letters, when he made phone calls, when he said, "That is my song. That is mine," something happened that no 17-year-old could possibly have understood at the time. 3 weeks before he was supposed to start at the conservatory, the scholarship was pulled. A 2-paragraph letter, a funding change, no apology, and a phone number that rang to a voicemail box that was always full. He applied again twice, denied both times. No reason given. Doors he had been promised would open simply did not. A young man who had been told he was the future found out the future had quietly changed its mind about him, and that no one would ever put in writing why. Have you ever worked your whole life for one door? Just one. And watched it slam shut before your hand even touched the handle? Have you ever known deep down in your gut, that somebody powerful made a single phone call about you, somewhere in a room you would never see, and that you would never be able to prove it as long as you lived. Soul could not prove it. He was a kid, so he did what people do when the door closes. He survived. He loaded trucks. He worked a warehouse. He worked the docks. He put the notebooks in a shoebox. And he put the shoebox on a high shelf. And he tried his best not to look at it. The piano he kept. His mother's old upright. But he played it less and less. Because every time he sat down, the music reminded him of everything that had been taken. And a man can only take so much reminding. Then he met a woman named Della May. She was a home health aide, warm and steady and quick to laugh. The kind of woman who laughed at things that were not even funny, just to fill the silence when he came home with his back aching and his eyes 1,000 miles away. She found the notebooks on the shelf one day and asked about them, and he told her the whole thing. And she did not say, "Poor baby." And she did not say, "Let it go." She said, "One day, the truth is going to come back around for you. Solomon, it always does. You just have to still be standing when it finally gets here." They got married. They had Naima. And for a good long while, it was enough. Then Della got sick. Pancreatic cancer. By the time anyone caught it, it had already gone where that kind of thing goes. 13 months. She fought like a lion. But the cancer fought harder. And behind the cancer came the bills. And the bills fought hardest of all. When Della passed, she left behind a husband, a 7-year-old daughter, and $214,000 in medical debt. Sol sold everything. The car, the furniture, the wedding ring he had bought on a payment plan, and finally, the upright piano, his mother's piano, the one thing on this earth he had sworn he would never let go of. A man came with a truck and carried it down the stairs. And Sol stood at the window and watched it go. And that was the last day he touched a keyboard. That was 8 years ago. He had not played a piano since. Add the lean. Grieving years before Della died. The years when work and worry pushed music to the very edge of his life. And it came to 11 years of silence. 11 years his hands went without the one thing they were ever built to do. But here's the thing about hands like that. They do not forget. They wait. Naima noticed it first. At the kitchen table, reading the paper, her father's left hand would start to move all on its own, pressing invisible keys against the wood, shaping chords from songs only he could hear. He did not even know he was doing it. She recorded him once, playing cornet on the corner, and watching it back later. She caught it, between phrases, in that half-second of rest. His free hand would flutter and stretch. Fingering runs on the empty air. A reflex, a language his body simply refused to stop speaking. No matter how many years went by with no answer. Now, there was exactly one person in the entire city of New Orleans who knew what Solomon Gaines really was. Her name was Vivienne Marchand, 72 years old, a retired concert pianist who had spent 30 years on the music faculty of a historically black university right there in the city. She had played recitals in places Sol had only seen on a map, trained students who went on to fill concert halls. And after her husband passed, she came home to the city she was born in and started volunteering at a community center 2 blocks from Sol's corner. Every Tuesday and Thursday she walked that way. And every time, she stopped. She always listened. And she always dropped a folded $20 bill into his case, tucked down under the coins so the wind would not carry it off. 6 months before the night, with the coffee and the kicked case, she heard something on that corner that stopped her cold in the middle of the sidewalk. Soul was between numbers, oiling that stubborn valve, and without even thinking about it, he was humming, not a tune off the radio. He was humming Rachmaninoff. A prelude. Every voice in its proper place. Every phrase shaped like it was rolling off a 9-foot concert grand and not coming out of the throat of a tired man on a milk crate under a highway. Vivienne Marchand had spent her whole life around the finest musicians alive. And she stood there with her hand pressed over her mouth for a full minute, before Saul even noticed she was there. They talked. It took her 3 more visits to pull the whole story out of him. The conservatory, the notebooks, the song, and when she finally understood all of it, she had to sit down on an upturned crate. And Vivienne Marchand, a woman who did not weep, a woman who buried her own husband dry-eyed because she said the tears were private, wiped her eyes right there on the sidewalk. After that day, she told him the same thing every single time she passed. She would stop, and she would shake her head, and she would say, "You are wasting a Carnegie Hall pair of hands on a junkyard horn. Solomon Gaines, it is a sin against God. And I knew him personally, before you were born." And Soul would smile, that small tired smile, and shake his head, and lift the cornet, and play her something sweet to send her on her way. Because what was he going to do? You do not get the door back. The door is closed. You learn to live in the hallway. That is what he believed. Right up until tonight. Now let me take you back to that bright, gilded room and tell you about the man who just threw scalding coffee on Solomon Gaines. Hollis Drake, 54 years old, founder and sole owner of Crescent Sound Group, the most powerful music company in the entire American South. His offices took up 4 floors of a glass tower downtown, and the walls of the top floor were covered, floor to ceiling, every single inch, in gold and platinum records. Nashville came to him now. New York came to him. A magazine once put his face on the cover and called him the last Kingmaker. And he had the cover blown up to the size of a door and hung behind his desk, so that every artist who came in to sign their life away saw it before they ever sat down. He had a certain way about him. Silver hair, combed straight back, suits cut by a man in Milan whose name he liked to mention, a watch worth more than most people's cars, which he checked even when he was not wondering about the time, and a voice, low, slow, almost gentle, almost kind, the kind of voice that could make you feel like the most important person who ever lived, right up until the second he decided to take you apart. His business was simple, and it had always been the same business. He owned everything: the publishing, the masters, your name, your face, your tours, all of it. You signed with Crescent Sound, and you did not have a career. You had an owner. The artists who fought him drowned in legal fees they could not afford. The ones who stayed learned to laugh when he laughed and go quiet when he went quiet. He built the whole empire on one simple truth: that there is always somebody with talent and no power, and that the gap between those two things is exactly where a man like Hollis Drake gets rich. But here is what nobody at that showcase would have guessed. Watching him in his Milan suit, with his platinum walls behind him, Hollis Drake was not born powerful. He was born dirt poor in a fly-speck town in the Mississippi Delta, where there were more churches than jobs and more funerals than weddings. His father was a session guitarist, or wanted to be, drove to Memphis 4 times a year with a demo tape, and came home 4 times a year with nothing, drank himself mean in between, and died, broke in a vinyl recliner at 51 years old, with a guitar pick still in his shirt pocket and a rejection letter on the kitchen table. Hollis was 14 the day they buried him, And standing over that hole in the red delta dirt, he made himself a promise. He was never, ever going to be the man on the wrong side of the door. He was going to be the door. That promise made him rich. It also made him cruel, not in the loud, dramatic, movie way, with speeches and slow pauses, cruel in the quiet, everyday way. The way he looked straight through a waitress like she was furniture. The way he talked about an artist's weight or an artist's accent while they stood close enough to hear every word. The way he truly, sincerely believed that showing a person exactly how small they were was a kind of honesty. That he was doing them a favor. Teaching them the same hard lesson the world taught him in that delta dirt, and tonight was supposed to be his night. The room was a cathedral once. A real one. Built more than 100 years ago. With 30-foot ceilings and tall stained glass windows that turned the stage lights into something that looked almost holy. They had stripped it down and turned it into an event hall years back. And tonight Hollis Drake had rented the whole building for the annual Crescent Sound showcase. The unveiling of his newest signed act. A slick young roots rock band called the Hollow Kings. Inside, 300 people. Label executives, talent scouts, music journalists with press badges, influencers holding their phones at the perfect angle, trays of champagne going around in slow circles, a coffee and espresso station along one wall for the people who still had business to do that night, a sound system that cost $250,000 and made the marble floor hum even with nothing playing, and dead center on the stage, under a single warm spotlight, sat a concert grand piano. 9.5 feet of black Vienna craftsmanship, the finest instrument money can buy. It had not been touched all night. Hollis Drake kept it there for the look. He called piano music elevator noise. To him, that piano was a prop, a gorgeous, useless centerpiece, a $200,000 coffee table. Royce Tatum, Drake's head of talent, was running the floor, early 40s, clipboard in one hand, an earpiece in, sweating through his collar the way he always did at these things. 9 years with Drake, long enough to know exactly when to speak and exactly when to disappear. Colt Ransom, the frontman of the Hollow Kings, was warming up backstage with the easy confidence of a young man who has already been told by someone powerful that he is going to make it. 26 years old, good-looking, talented enough, not extraordinary. But Drake never needed extraordinary. Extraordinary cannot be controlled. Drake needed controllable. 15 minutes to showtime. The room was warm and loud and very pleased with itself. And that is when Solomon Gaines came through the door. He had not meant to come in. Here is how it happened. An hour before, Soul was on his corner, 3 numbers into his evening set, when a long black car pulled up in front of the old cathedral down the block. Somebody in Drake's group, climbing out, lighting a cigarette, heard that cornet drifting up from under the overpass and stopped to listen. Said something to Drake. And Drake, 3 drinks deep with his ego running hot, looked down the street at the black man on the milk crate and saw what he always saw. A chance to remind somebody exactly where he thought they belonged. Bring him in. Drake said, I want the whole room to see this. 2 men walked down. One of them smiled. And it was not a kind smile. Boss wants to hear you play, he said. Inside? Come on now. Soul hesitated. He looked at his cornet case. He looked at the glowing doorway full of light and laughter, and people who would never in their lives need a single thing he had to give. And then he thought about Naima. $1,600. 5 weeks. $280 in a coffee can. So he stood up. He packed his horn, and he followed them in. The conversations did not stop all at once. They died down in waves, table by table, like a breeze giving out. People noticed the flannel shirt first, then the taped-up case, then, and you could actually watch it move across the room, the color of his skin. A woman at the bar leaned into her husband and whispered something behind her glass. A man in a blazer took a half-step backward, like poverty might be catching. A bartender near the espresso station, a decent kid, just doing his job, saw the old man standing there, looking lost, and reached for a glass to pour him some water. And that was the spark. That was all it took. You already know what Hollis Drake did next. The cup of scalding coffee across the chest, the $5,000 shoe kicking the cornet case, skidding across the marble, the spit on the boots, the word, animals, boy, rat. People like you do not get to breathe the same air. All of it. In front of 300 of the most powerful people in the business, and a live stream climbing past 40,000 strangers who could not believe what they were seeing. And Solomon Gaines stood there, soaked and steaming and silent, and looked Hollis Drake dead in the eye with that bottomless calm. And the whole room went cold. But Drake was not finished. That was the thing about him. Throwing the man out was not enough. He wanted a show. He wanted the room laughing with him. Not just at the joke, but at the man. He glanced at the kicked case lying on its side across the floor, and a slow, ugly grin spread over his face. He pulled out his phone and held it up high, so the screen faced the crowd. The way you hold up something you want everyone to witness. Tell you what, Drake said, loud enough to fill the cathedral. $500,000. Right now. Tonight. If this gutter rat and that junkyard horn can outplay the Hollow Kings on that stage, my band, my crowd, my rules. He spread his arms wide for the room. You win. Altman. I send it to you while you stand there dripping on my floor. You lose. He let the grin reach his eyes. You crawl back out that door. And you never set foot on this block. In this city. Anywhere near me. Ever again. The room changed temperature. This was not a joke anymore. And every person in it could feel it. Phones came up all over the cathedral. Screens lit the dark. Somebody whispered, "Is he serious?" He was serious. A young black man near the back called out, "Do it. Brother. Take his money." An older woman by the door shook her head slowly. The way you shake your head at something you have watched too many times before. A powerful man turning a person who cannot afford to say no into the evening's entertainment. The music journalist down front. A woman named Renata Castile. Pushed in closer with her phone held high. The little red light already glowing. She was live. The number on her screen read 40,000. And it was still climbing. And then the heavy door at the back of the cathedral swung open. And Naima Gaines walked in. She was carrying a thermos of red beans and a sandwich wrapped in foil. Her father's dinner? He had not come home at his usual time. So she had walked the long way down through the quarter, following the noise and the lights spilling out of the old cathedral. She stepped inside, and she saw her father standing in the middle of a room full of strangers in expensive clothes, soaked in coffee, his horn case lying kicked across the floor, being looked at like an animal in a cage. Her face did not show embarrassment. Not this time. It showed something harder and cleaner than that. It showed fury. She did not say a word. She just stood by the door, holding the soup and the sandwich. And she watched. Sol saw her. Their eyes met across that whole bright, terrible room. And in that one look, past everything, Every night on the couch. Every we are getting close. Every dollar in the coffee can. Every promise he had ever made to a woman who was not here to see whether he kept it. Now here is what I want you to sit with, for 1 second. If you were Solomon Gaines, standing in the middle of a cathedral full of people who had already decided exactly what you were, soaked in scalding coffee. Your daughter watching you from the doorway. 300 phones waiting for you to fall apart. What would you do? Would you pick up your horn and walk out with whatever was left of your pride? Get home. Dry off. Heat up the beans. Pretend none of it ever happened. That is the safe move. That is the quiet move. That is the move Solomon Gaines had been making in one form or another for 30 years. Or would you do the one thing nobody in that room could possibly see coming, because Sol Gaines was standing very still, and his hands were shaking, just a little, just enough that he could feel the tremor in his fingertips. The same fingertips that had been pressing valves for 11 years, because pressing keys was a life he could not afford to remember. And inside that stillness, he was deciding what kind of man his daughter was about to watch him be. He thought about walking. God knows. It would have been the smart thing. And then he heard a voice. Not in the room. In his memory. De la. Sitting up against the pillows in that hospital bed. 3 weeks before the end. The oxygen tube, under her nose. Her hand too thin to squeeze, but squeezing his anyway. She had looked at him with those tired eyes and she had said, "Do not let them bury you twice. Solomon, you hear me. They put you in the ground once already. You and that song. Do not you dare climb down in that hole a second time, not while you still have breath in you." He had nodded. He had promised her. And then he had spent 8 more years climbing quietly down into that hole. One shovelful at a time. Telling himself it was just survival. Telling himself the hallway was where he lived now. He looked at Naima in the doorway, 16 years old, watching her father decide. If he walked out, what would she learn? That the world tells you to sit down. And you sit. That you swallow the insult and call the swallowing survival. That the safest place in the whole world for a gift is the bottom of a shoebox on a high shelf, where nobody can see it and nobody can ever take it from you again. He could not teach her that. He would not. Sol turned his head. Slow. And he looked at the stage. Not at Drake. Not at the crowd. At the stage. At that 9.5 feet of black piano sitting alone under the warm light. Every key untouched all night. Waiting. The way it had been waiting all evening. The way a thing waits when it knows it was built for a purpose nobody in the room has been willing to give it. 11 years. His hands knew the shapes. He could feel them tracing chords against the valves of his horn without his permission. But the speed, the stamina, the endurance to hold a whole piece together for 6 straight minutes. He genuinely did not know if his body would answer him or betray him. In front of 300 people. He had no idea, but he knew one thing for certain. He was not going to stand on this floor, soaked in this man's coffee, and be laughed at one more second. Solomon Gaines walked over to where his cornet case lay on its side. He knelt down. He opened it. Soft. The way you open something that is sleeping. He laid the old horn inside. And he closed the crunching latches, and he stood the case up gently against the wall. Then he straightened up to his full height. The room had gone quiet again. Watching, he turned and he looked at Hollis Drake. Calm. Level. No anger in it. And no fear in it either. I do not need your stage. Sol said. Low. And every soul in that cathedral heard him. And I do not need your horn. He turned his head and looked up at the piano. But if that piano works, you name the song. Drake blinked. Then he laughed, delighted, because this was even better than he had hoped. Oh, the piano. Even better? Dealer's choice, then. Maestro. Anything you like? Make it count. He spread his arms to the room, performing for them. Certain he was about to watch a beggar embarrass himself on a $200,000 instrument he could not even pronounce. Solomon Gaines, still dripping coffee onto the marble, started walking toward the stage, and the crowd parted in front of him without being asked. The walk from the middle of that floor to the stage was maybe 40 feet. It felt like 40 miles. Every step Saul took. He could feel the eyes on the back of his neck. 300 people watching a soaked black man in a wet flannel shirt and scuffed work boots cross a marble floor toward a piano that cost more than everything he had ever owned in his life, put together and multiplied. Some of them were smirking. Some were recording. A few looked away. Embarrassed. Not for themselves. For him. A woman in a red dress murmured to the man beside her, "Oh, this is going to be hard to watch." The bartender stood frozen with a glass in his hand. Even the air in the old cathedral seemed to thicken, like the building itself had drawn a breath and was holding it. Drake leaned against the bar with a fresh drink and nudged Royce Tatum. "Watch this," he said, grinning. $5 says he does not even know where Middle C is. Royce did not answer. Royce was watching Saul's hands. Saul climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. The spotlight hit his face. Warm. Warm like sunlight. The kind of warmth he had not stood inside of in a very, very long time. From up here, he could see the whole room. A sea of fine clothes and glowing screens, and faces waiting for the joke to land. He could see Naima by the back door, her knuckles white around the thermos. And 3 rows back, he could see Vivienne Marchand, both hands pressed flat over her mouth, her eyes already shining. She knew, in that entire cathedral, she was the only living soul who knew what was about to happen. And she could not breathe. Saul reached the piano. He stood beside it for a moment, looking down at it, the way a man looks at the front porch of a house he used to live in. Alone. Long time ago. Before everything. The wood gleamed black under the light, deep and still as river water at midnight. He laid his hand flat on the lid and ran his fingertips along it. Slow. He had not touched a piano in 11 years. And his hand was shaking. But the shake was not fear anymore. The shake was recognition. The shake was a man and a thing he loved, finding each other again after one of them had given the other up for dead. He sat down on the bench. He adjusted it. He drew it forward an inch. Then another inch. Somebody in the dark stifled a laugh. A street player fussing over a piano bench like he had any business there. Saul set his fingers on the keys. And he did not press. He held them there. 4 full seconds. Eyes open. Breathing slow. The weight of 300 strangers pressing down on his shoulders like a hand. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning hum and the ice settle in a glass 3 tables away. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even Hollis Drake stopped, his drink halfway to his mouth. Then his littlest finger pressed a single low note. All the way down at the bottom of that great black piano. It filled the cathedral like a bell ringing in an empty church. Deep. Round. Enormous. It hung in the air for 3 long seconds before it faded down into nothing, and Solomon Gaines began to play. He started with a spiritual, slow, and plain, and reverent. A hymn his mother used to play in those storefront churches. The one the old folks just called the Sunday song. because it had never been written down anywhere except in the blood. 4 chords. The left hand laying down a foundation, steady as a heartbeat. The right hand carrying the melody, the way a man carries a candle down a dark hallway. Careful, cupped, terrified. The flame might blow out, and it almost did. The first phrase came out uneven. A note landed a hair too late. Another pressed too soft, and did not sound at all. You could hear the rust in it. 11 years of silence sitting in his joints like cold iron that had not been worked. A man near the bar shook his head and looked over at Drake, as if to say, "See." Just like we figured, Drake leaned to Royce. "Told you," he murmured, but something was happening. Something small. Something only a trained ear would have caught. The left hand steadied. The chords underneath deepened. Not louder. Richer. Fuller. Like a river finding its old channel again after a long drought. A run flickered up in the right hand. 6 fast notes that cascaded down and vanished back into the hymn before anyone could quite register what they had heard. The man who shook his head stopped shaking it. Soul played the spiritual, another 30 seconds. And with each bar of it, something came back. Not all at once. Not perfectly. The way a cold house warms up in winter. Room by room. Slow. Until all at once you realize the chill is gone and you cannot say exactly when it left. Then the hymn began to bend. A blue note crept in. Then another. The straight gospel started to lean, and to swing, and to loosen at the hips, and without any seam you could point to, the Sunday song turned into something older and dirtier and a whole lot more alive. New Orleans. His left hand dropped into a rolling 5-less. Thundering boogie down in the bass that rumbled up through the stage and into the floorboards and into the... You felt it in your chest before your ears even caught up. This was the city talking now. 100 years of piano men in 100 barrel houses. All of it pouring out of the hands of a man they had dragged in off the curb 10 minutes ago for a laugh. The right hand broke loose and started to improvise. Trills that shimmered like sun on the river. Bent notes that moaned like a voice, too proud to cry. He quoted an old blues lick. Everybody half knew. Turned it inside out. And rebuilt it into a chord. So rich and strange it had no business coming out of a man who had not touched a keyboard in over a decade. The room changed. You could feel it move. A shift in the air. In the way people were sitting. In every spine in the building. Something was happening that was not supposed to happen. People stopped recording. Not because they lost interest. Because they forgot they were holding phones at all. Colt Ransom had come out to the edge of the backstage curtain to watch what he assumed would be a quick, painless little humiliation. He had been a working musician for years. And what he was hearing from this soaked man in the flannel shirt made his own hands feel like a child's toys. He set his beer down on a road case. He did not pick it up again the rest of the night. Vivienne Marchand was crying. Not sobbing. Just tears running down her face. Silo. The way rain runs down a window after the storm has passed, but the glass has not dried yet. 30 years on a music faculty. Students in concert halls on 3 continents. And she was sitting in a folding chair, listening to the most gifted pair of hands she had ever encountered in her long life, playing the blues on a Vienna Grand. For a room full of people who had laughed at him 90 seconds ago, she mouthed 2 words to nobody at all. There he is, down in front. Renata Castile glanced at her phone. The number on the screen read 4,000 when she started. It read 20,000 now. And it was climbing too fast to watch. The comments were a blur. She turned the camera back to the stage with a hand that was not quite steady, and Solomon Gaines kept going. The blues deepened. Darkened. His left hand drove harder. His right hand climbed higher. The whole thing tightened like a coil. And the people in that cathedral leaned forward as one single body, because they could feel it now, the way you feel a wave gathering itself up out at sea before it stands all the way up and breaks. Something was coming. Something was about to crest. They had no idea what. And then, with no warning at all, the blues fell away, and Solomon Gaines began to play a melody that every single person in that cathedral knew. It came in soft at first, just the right hand, picking it out like a memory rising to the surface, and one by one, all around the room. You could watch the recognition land on people's faces. A woman's lips parted. A man set down his glass. Because this was not some deep cut. This was the song, the one they play at weddings and at funerals and on Sunday mornings in cities all over this country. The one every person in the American music business could hum in their sleep. The cornerstone. The standard. The first and biggest hit Crescent Sound ever released. The song that built the glass tower downtown and paid for every gold record on Hollis Drake's wall. Carry Me Over. 300 people recognized it inside of 4 notes. And the warmth that moved through that room, the soft smiles, the little murmur of recognition, was the warmth people feel when a stranger starts playing a song they have loved their whole lives. But Soul was not playing it the way it goes on the record. He was playing it the way it was born. He played the verse the whole world knew, and then he played a bridge the world had never heard. A second bridge, an answer to the first one, aching and strange and perfect, the kind of thing that has never appeared on any sheet of music or any recording anywhere on earth, because it had only ever lived in one single place, in the black composition notebook of a 17-year-old boy who wrote the whole song at his kitchen table in one night. Thinking about his mother's hands, Vivienne Marchand made a small, broken sound in her chair, because she understood. She was the only one in that room who understood. Yet, up at the bar, Hollis Drake's grin had gone stiff and strange. He did not know why his stomach had just dropped. He did not recognize the man at the piano. 30 years and 100,000 faces. And he genuinely did not recognize the 17-year-old he had robbed. Now 51 and gray and worn down to bare metal like his own horn. But some animal part of Hollis Drake knew that something was very wrong. Because you do not hear your own song played like that, played from the inside, played by the hand that actually made it, played with a part that nobody alive was ever supposed to know. You do not hear that. And feel nothing. Saul let Carry Me Over ring out one more time, full and golden. His mother's whole long road home in every chord, and then he tore it open. He took that beloved, gentle, stolen song, and he detonated it. The left hand came crashing down in a thundering run that swept the entire bottom of the piano, low and massive, shaking the iron frame so hard you could see the champagne trembling in the glasses on the tables. And up over the top of it, the right hand launched into something violent and brilliant and unmistakable to anyone who had ever sat through a single piano lesson. Chopin. The revolutionary etude, a wall of cascading fury, a storm of notes, the sound of a man who has been pushed down one time too many finally standing all the way up. And here is the thing that made Vivienne Marchand grip the arms of her chair and stop breathing entirely. He was not just playing Chopin. He was weaving it together with Carry Me Over, the melody of his stolen song riding on top of that revolutionary storm. His mother's gospel bones underneath all that Vienna fire, the thing he had written as a boy, and the thing that had been taken from him, fused into one single piece, played at the same time, by the same 2 hands, in front of the very man who had built a fortune on the theft, and not one person in that room, except for one old professor, knew they were watching a confession and a reckoning play out in real time. In music. With no words at all, the cathedral stopped being a room. It became one held breath, a single suspended moment where every assumption anybody had made about the man on that bench simply died. Saul played with his eyes closed now, sweat beading at his hairline, his foot tapping, not for the time, for joy. His wet flannel sleeves were shoved up past the elbows, and you could see the tendons in his forearms moving like cables under the skin. His hands were a blur up top, precise and merciless down below. The left and the right, carrying on two completely separate conversations that somehow added up to one perfect, unanswerable sentence. A woman gasped out loud, the kind that escapes you before you can stop it. A label executive in the back, who had been scrolling his phone all night, stood up, then sat down, then stood up again, his body unable to decide what to do with what it was hearing. Two people who had been quietly heading for the exit turned around and came back. Renata Castile's phone screen read 22,000, then 30, then 48,000 people, all watching a man. None of them had ever heard of play a piano. Nobody knew he could touch. He built it. And he built it. The revolutionary storm climbing. The gospel rising up to meet it. Call and response. The left hand asking the oldest question there is, and the right hand answering it, louder and more certain with every bar, until the sound filled every inch of that old cathedral. The stained glass, the 30-foot ceiling, the marble, the bones of every single person standing in it. And then he brought it home. He pulled the whole storm back down into Carry Me, over one final time, soft and softer, the way his mother used to end it, the way it was always meant to end. And on the last phrase he laid down one enormous chord with both hands, full force, and held the pedal, and the sound rang out across the room, huge and warm and golden and alive. And then it began to fade, slow, the way the last light pulls off the horizon at the end of a long day, inch by inch, note by note, until the only thing left in the whole cathedral was the memory of it. Saul lifted his hands off the keys and laid them in his lap. For 2 full seconds, there was absolute silence. Not the awkward kind, not the confused kind. The kind of silence that lives in the half-second between the lightning and the thunder, when the whole world holds still because it knows what is coming. One person clapped, then another, then the room exploded. 300 people came up off their chairs at once. Not a politovation, a violent one, the kind where people shout and stamp their feet and grab the stranger next to them by the arm. A woman in the front row was crying into both hands. A man kept shaking his head over and over, whispering something nobody could hear. Nemagens, standing by the back door with a thermos of red beans and a sandwich wrapped in foil, was sobbing, not sad tears. The other kind, the kind that come when you finally watch the whole world see your father the way you always knew he was, the way the world had refused to see him for 30 long years. Colt Ransom stood at the curtain and applauded slowly. His whole face changed. Every bit of his easy confidence gone, and something better in its place. Humility. The real kind. The kind that cost you something. Renata Castile's stream hit 48,000. The comments had collapsed down into one line, repeating, over and over, faster than anyone could read it. Who is he? Who is he? Who is he? And Vivienne Marchand did not clap at all. She sat in her folding chair, with the tears running down her face. And she smiled, because she had already said everything she needed to say 6 months ago. On a sidewalk, under a highway. You are wasting a Carnegie Hall pair of hands on a junkyard horn. Tonight, The Vienna Grand had finally found its hands. And then, slowly, every eye in that cathedral turned away from the stage and found Hollis Drake. He was standing in the same spot by the bar, in the same expensive suit. But everything else about him had come apart. His phone hung in his hand, the screen gone dark. He had stopped recording somewhere in the middle and could not have told you when. His drink sat on the bar, untouched. The ice long since melted to water. His jaw had gone slack. Not open, just loose. Like the muscles in his face had forgotten which expression they were supposed to hold. 300 people were looking at him now. Not at the stage. At him. The man who threw the coffee. The man who kicked the case across the floor and spat on a stranger's boots and called him an animal, while that same stranger walked up onto the stage and used a piano Hollis Drake called elevator noise to shake the walls of a cathedral he had rented with his own money. The power in that room had flipped all the way over. Completely. For good. And every single person in the building could feel which way it ran now. Royce Tatum leaned in close to Drake's ear. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a verdict. Hollis, he said. The stream. 48,000 people just watched all of it. On camera. The coffee. The bet. All of it. Drake's face went white. Not the white of anger. The white of a man who has just understood that the trap he is standing in is one he built himself. Board by board. And nailed shut from the inside. He had two ways out. And he saw both of them in an instant. Pay the $500,000 in front of the room and the entire internet, au refuse, and let 48,000 witnesses turn him into the most hated man in America for the next 6 months. Drake set his jaw. He straightened his tie, and he walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for him. The way it had parted for Soul. But not the same way. When Soul walked through, people stepped aside out of wonder. When Drake walked through, they stepped aside out of judgment. And he could feel the difference in his skin like a change in the weather. He reached the foot of the stage. Saul was still sitting at the bench, hands folded in his lap, calm as still water. And for the first time all night, Hollis Drake had to look up at the man. The stage was only knee-high. It might as well have been a mountain. Drake opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. That was, he said, and stopped, and swallowed. That was not what I expected. Saul looked down at him. No anger in it. No gloating. No heat at all. Just the quiet, level gaze of a man who finally has nothing left to prove to anybody. You expected nothing, Saul said softly. From me? From the very start. That is the whole reason you lost. The room heard every word. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Not shock. Not laughter. Recognition. The sound people make when the truth lands clean and square, and there is nothing left to say back to it. Drake reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. His hand was shaking. And this time, he was the one who could not stop it. Royce noticed and looked away. Drake opened the app. He typed in the number, $500,000. He turned the screen towards Soul, and he pressed send. Soul did not even look at the screen. He just nodded. Once, down in front. Renata Castile raised her phone and said 5 words into the live stream, her voice cracking. New Orleans. You just witnessed something. 48,000 people agreed. And then Vivienne Marchand stood up. She did not rush. She walked the way she walked everywhere. Slow. Deliberated. Like a woman who has seen enough of the world to know that the moments that matter deserve to be met with patience. She crossed to the stage. Soul saw her coming, and his composure finally cracked. Right at the corners of his eyes, she reached the foot of the stage. and she looked up at him, and she did not say a word. She only nodded. He nodded back. I could try to tell you what passed between them in that nod. But if you have ever had one single person believe in you before you believed in yourself, it believe in you when there was no evidence and no reward. Believe in you just because they could see what was really there. Then you already know exactly what that nod meant. And no words I have would do it justice anyway. But Vivienne Marchand was not finished. Because Vivienne Marchand had been carrying something for 6 months. Ever since she pulled the whole story out of a tired man on a milk crate. And now, in front of 48,000 witnesses and 300 of the most powerful people in the music business, she turned around and faced the room. My name is Vivienne Marchand, she said, and her voice, trained for 60 years to fill a concert hall with no microphone, filled that cathedral. I taught piano for 30 years, and I want every single one of you to hear me clearly. That song he just played for you, the one you all know, the one that built this man's entire company, it was not written by who you think wrote it. It was written by Solomon Gaines. When he was 17 years old, I have heard him hum the bridge he just played to you a dozen times. On a street corner, under a highway, a bridge that is on no recording and no page anywhere in this world. Because it has only ever lived in his hands, the cathedral went dead silent, and Hollis Drake, standing at the foot of that stage, soaked in his own sudden cold sweat, finally, 30 years too late, looked up into Solomon Gaines's face, and he recognized the boy from the studio on Magazine Street. Sol and Naima left the cathedral through a side door. No press conference, no interviews, no victory lap. Just a man carrying a taped-up horn case and a girl carrying a thermos and a sandwich. Walking out into the cool New Orleans night. The city had not changed. The same brass spilled out of Bourbon Street 2 blocks over. The same streetcar rattled somewhere off in the dark. Friday night went right on doing what Friday nights do. But something between a father and a daughter had shifted, quietly. And for good, they walked a full block before Naima spoke. "Mama," she said, would have turned that whole room over. And Sol laughed. A real laugh. Deep. And sudden. The kind that shakes your whole chest. The kind Naima had not heard from her father in years. Maybe not ever. "Yeah," he said, when he could finally talk. "Yeah. Baby." She surely would have. They walked home. Up the stairs over the laundromat. Into the one-bedroom apartment where the machines were already rumbling for the night. Naima heated up the red beans. Sol sat down on the couch. His couch. His bed. And he pulled out his phone. He had not looked at it since the stage. The screen lit up. $500,000. Received. He stared at the number for a long time. Then he set the phone face down on the cushion, and he closed his eyes. He did not cry, but it was close. The next morning, he walked into the office for that summer architecture studio, and he registered his daughter for the program. $1,600. "Would you like to set up a payment plan?" the woman asked. "No, Mom," Sol said. "Full amount. Today?" His hand shook when he took the receipt. Not from nerves. From relief. From the weight of a promise finally lifting off his back after 8 long years. But that was just the beginning. Because the $500,000 was never going to be the real reckoning. The real reckoning had only just been set loose. The second Vivienne Marchand turned around and faced that room. The clip went everywhere. Renata Casteel's stream. Cut down to 9 minutes. Passed 3 million views in 72 hours. Street musician reveals he wrote the song that built a music empire. It got reposted by every music page. Every reaction channel. every news outlet in the country. The comments came in by the tens of thousands, and almost all of them said the same two things. How did nobody know about this man? And he needs to get back every single dollar they stole from him. And this time, somebody with the power to make that happen was listening. Her name was Adrienne Vidal, a music rights attorney out of New Orleans, who had spent 20 years pulling stolen catalogs back out of the hands of men exactly like Hollis Drake. She watched that 9-minute clip 3 times before she picked up the phone and called Vivienne Marchand, who knew exactly where to find Saul. Now here is the thing about Solomon Gaines. When he sold his mother's piano to bury his wife, he sold the car, the furniture, the wedding ring. He sold all of it. But there was one box he never sold. One box he never even let himself open. Way up on the high shelf in the closet, a shoebox full of black composition notebooks. And in those notebooks, in pencil, in the handwriting of a 17-year-old boy, dharmann, dated in the corner, the exact way his mother had taught him to date everything, was "Carry Me Over." The verse, the chorus, and the second bridge, the one that has never appeared on a single recording in 30 years, the one he played for 300 people and 48,000 strangers. Note for note. Off the page he wrote as a child. Adrienne Vidal looked at that notebook, and at the dates, and at the video of the composer playing his own unrecorded bridge from memory. And she said one word: "Gotcha." The case took 11 months. And listen to me. It was not a movie. There were no dramatic courtroom speeches. There was forensic musicology. 3 separate experts who compared the notebooks to the master recordings and came to the very same conclusion. There were old studio logs from the session on Magazine Street that Drake's own company had kept and forgotten about, with a teenage Solomon Gaines' name buried in them as session help. There were 2 other artists, older now, gray now, who came forward the moment the story broke and said quietly, "It happened to me too. He did the very same thing to me. I just never had the proof." And there was a city, and then a whole country, watching. In the end, Hollis Drake settled, because the alternative was a verdict, and a verdict would have been so much worse. Solomon Gaines was legally restored as the author of Carry Me Over. He received 30 years of back royalties on the biggest standard in that entire catalog, a number with a whole lot more zeros on it than the $500,000 from the bet. Enough to make that bet look like the tip Drake said he would leave out of boredom. And the ownership of the song, the cornerstone of the whole empire, reverted to the man who actually wrote it. But here is what matters more than any one man's money. And this is the part you do not get to forget. The case became a precedent. Adrienne Vidal used it to crack open a dozen more. The investigation into Crescent Sound revealed a 30-year pattern. Black writers, young writers, poor writers, talked out of their credits with a handshake and a promise, and then quietly buried the moment they dared to ask a question. State regulators got involved. Industry blogs ran the story under a word that had never once appeared next to Hollis Drake's name in print before: theft. And out of that settlement, Vivienne Marchand and Solomon Gaines built something, the Odessa Gaines Fund, named for his mother, a legal aid foundation that does exactly one thing. It helps the robbed get their work back. In its very first year, it reopened 17 cases. The crack Solomon Gaines put in that wall did not stay one man wide. Now let me be honest with you about Hollis Drake. The way these stories should always be honest. He did not become a good man. That would be a lie. And this story does not need one. He kept some of his money. He kept the glass tower. For a while. But the thing he had spent his whole life building, the silence, the fear, the absolute certainty that nobody would ever push back. That was gone. And that does not come back. 2 more artists walked off the label that year. Lawyers in hand. The investors got nervous. The magazine that once called him the last Kingmaker ran a very different kind of cover story. He was still rich. He was still standing. But the room went quiet in a whole new way when Hollis Drake walked into it now. Not the quiet of fear. The quiet of people who have seen exactly what you are, and there is no fortune on earth big enough to buy that back. He died. Some years later, in a recliner, with the television on, almost exactly the way his own father had. The man who swore over a hole in the Delta dirt that he would never be on the wrong side of the door spent his entire life becoming the door. And in the end, the only thing he ever truly built was a wall. And a stranger's son had walked right through it. Justice is not always a single clap of thunder. Sometimes it is just the first crack in a wall that everybody thought was solid. And sometimes that crack starts with one tired man on a milk crate, soaked in another man's coffee, who was brave enough, just one time, to stand up. And Solomon Gaines. He did not move into a mansion. He did not chase a record deal or a magazine cover. He bought a small house in Trem, 2 blocks from the corner he used to play on, with a real piano in the front room, an upright, just like his mother's, the first one he had owned in 8 years. He paid for Naima's program, and then he paid for her college. Every dollar. No loans. No coffee can under the sink. For the first time in her whole life, the only thing standing between that girl and a degree was her own effort. Just her. The promised soul made to Della in a hospital room. The one he carried, like a stone, for 8 years. It was finally done. He still plays cornet on his corner, under the Claiborne overpass every Saturday morning. Same spot. Same milk crate. Same hand-painted cardboard sign. $1 or a smile. Though these days, the people who stop to listen sometimes know exactly who he is. And the case fills up a whole lot faster than it used to. But 3 afternoons a week, Solomon Gaines sits down at a donated piano in a community center in Trem, the same one, 2 blocks from where Vivian Marchand first heard him hum Rachmaninoff. And he teaches the neighborhood children how to find the keys. He starts every single one of them the exact same way his mother started him, with 4 gospel chords, the ones that do not live on any sheet of paper, because they live in the blood. And the line for his lessons gets a little bit longer every week. So, what did you just hear? A story about a man who could play the piano. That is the simple version. But here is what it was really about. It was about a world that decides who you are before you ever open your mouth. A world that looks at a flannel shirt and a pair of work boots and a taped-up case and just assumes there is nothing underneath worth listening to. A world where a man can carry a once-in-a-generation gift for 51 years and never once be asked to show it. Not because the gift was not there, but because the rooms where gifts get recognized have doors that do not open for everyone. And it was about something uglier than just not looking. Because Solomon Gaines was not only overlooked, he was robbed. His gift was seen, clearly, early, by exactly the kind of powerful man who knew precisely what it was worth. And then it was taken, and he was buried, so he could not object. That happens? It has always happened. The whole history of American music is full of Solomon Gaineses, black hands that wrote the songs and built the sound and never got their name on the label. Never got the door. Never got 1 ounce of the dignity. While somebody else got the glass tower, that is not just a story. That is a pattern. And the only reason this one ended with the truth coming back around is that 1 tired man finally stood up, and 1 old woman finally spoke. And 48,000 strangers finally refused to look away. The world is full of them right now. People with gifts buried under debt, under grief, under the weight of being looked past every single day. People humming Rachmaninoff while they oil a stuck valve. People tracing invisible keys on a kitchen table. Practicing for a stage that nobody ever offered them. The question was never whether they are good enough. The question is whether we have built a world that is willing to hear them and willing to give them back what was taken. If this made you feel something, anger, or hope, or both at the same time, then it did its job. But a feeling only matters if it moves. So here is what I will ask you. If you know somebody who has been underestimated, somebody whose gift the world has not bothered to see yet, send them this. Sometimes a story is the only reminder a person needs that they are not crazy for believing in the thing they carry inside. And if you want more stories like this one, about people who were told they were nothing and proved the whole world wrong, subscribe and hit the bell. Every single week, we find another Solomon Gaines. Next time, a cleaning woman walks into a boardroom that is about to vote on the future of the very building she has been mopping for 20 years. You are not going to want to miss it. One last picture before you go. Saturday morning, a community center in Trem, a donated upright piano in a room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs, 3 kids in a half circle, Solomon Gaines on the bench, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, showing a little girl where to put her fingers. She presses a key, the right one, her very first true note, and Saul smiles. The same smile Naima had only ever seen in one old photograph. From before the debt, before the grief, before the corner, the smile from before the door ever closed. Some people spend their whole lives looking for a stage. Some stages come looking for you. Have you ever had a gift or a dream that somebody dismissed because of how you looked, or where you came from, or what you did to keep the lights on? Tell me about it in the comments. I read them. And do not ever let a man's shirt fool you into thinking he is ordinary, because greatness does not ask anybody for permission. Sometimes all it ever needed was one chance, one piano, and the nerve to sit down